Choosing the right airbrush and getting to grips with it is an absolute minefield. Let's see if we can navigate our way through. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie, and this is the first of a series of airbrush videos in which I hope to take us from a complete beginner through to a competent novice, let's say. Now, I mentioned this series of videos at our Model Railway Club because I wanted to try to find out what sort of expertise was in the club and the sort of mistakes that people have made. I was absolutely astounded to find out that people just go and buy shiny things. I mean, you go to a show and you see a new airbrush and you think, oh, it's better than the one I've got. So they buy it, but they haven't even got the other one out of the box. Now, we'll start with a gentleman called Richard W. Because he has bought loads of airbrushes, so let's slap him on the table and see what he's done wrong. Now, here are 4 of Richard's airbrushes. He basically admits they were mistakes and he shouldn't have bought them. So let's have a quick look one at a time. So the first one, this is a Fengda, F-E-N-G-D-A, an FE183. It appears to have all the toys on it. It's a double action airbrush, which is essential. It's got a flow limiter on the back end, which can be quite useful. A reasonable sized cup, and it's good to the touch. It feels quite good. However, at £27.99, I suspect that once you get inside it from the shiny kind of buy me sort of mode, it's not very good. And Richard completely agrees. Now the second one, this is an AB132, and it has a side cup, as you can see, and again it should work perfectly adequately. But at £19.99, I don't expect this to be well made. The next 2 are kind of similar. This is an AB180, and this is exactly the same, except it doesn't have this cutaway section. So I think it's fair to say that this is basically the same airbrush. But this AB180 retails at £28.99. It appears to have all the toys. You've got the flow limiter again on the back end. You've got a means of opening the valve quickly. It's even got a crown nozzle on the end and a reasonably sized air cup. It seems okay to the touch. Oh, sorry, and it's got an air pressure limiter on this one. Marvellous. But of course, like everything else, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I said to Richard, so what do you think of them? He says, well, they're all basically rubbish. So let's hope that you don't do the same. Now, just to prove that Richard is not the only one who makes mistakes, we move on to my good friend Ian. Now, Ian also gave me 4 airbrushes, and shockingly, as you'd expect, there is the AB130 at £19.99. This is followed by the AB200, we're going up market now, at £23.99. Then there's this airbrush here with no markings whatsoever. However, it did come with an expanding sort of leaflet and all this sort of blah, as you'd expect. On the front cover it just says airbrush. There are no contact information, there's no email information, there's no website, no nothing, no spares, nothing. So you get the feeling when you look at this airbrush and you feel the way that the threads go together, this really is another low budget airline. But then I think that Ian sort of learned his lesson. And this is an Iwata Eclipse. What would I sum this as? This is a good to high-end quality airbrush. Iwata make decent stuff. Some of it comes with 5-year warranties, and you just know from the feel of this when you pull it apart and take it back together, it's a quality item. And it comes with full spares support. Ian has made a great decision. But not only Ian, because another guy at our Model Railway Club by the name of, codenamed Big Roger, he's a tall lad, has also got an Iwata Eclipse, somewhat different than Ian's. This is a This is a cup feed one. As you can see, there's a cup on the top, whereas Ian's is actually a side feed where the cup goes on the side. And this is another excellent quality, decent airbrush. Though I do suspect, Roger, you've never used this. Right, what about my mistakes? And so to my journey. Well, I started out with a package which came with a small compressor and this little beastie here, which is a Premiere G35, and the 35 refers to the 0.35 millimeter nozzle. Now there's some contention with this one because it's also an Iwata SP35, which seems to be exactly the same in every single shape. So whether Iwata have actually turned this out themselves, you know, or another sort of a budget end of line, I don't know. But it's not what we call it, an Iwata knockoff, that's for sure, because it is absolutely identical. It's the same thing. But there we go. I bought this and the compressor many years ago, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, for £99. But now the brush on its, the airbrush on its own retails at £92.35. But I think they're sort of quite scarce now. They've been sort of outdated. But it's a very small cup, but it is great for just getting in there and doing small weathering tasks. It's a decent enough little video. And as I said, with my videos number 35 and 36, I think I used this one during those. I then moved on to Iwata, or Iwata proper, let's say, with the Revolution BCR. Now, when I bought this airbrush, it came with a 5-year warranty, but just looking online, it now comes with a 10-year warranty. So you can see how we've had a leap in quality. This is, I would call this a kind of, I don't know, a Mercedes of airbrushes. These are good quality, decent stuff. They're all double action airbrushes. Yeah, they are so well maintained, and of course you can get the spares. If you drop the needle, you bend it, something gets worn, you need replacement seals, or you lose the crown or whatever, it's not the end of the world. You know, you get onto perhaps the airbrush company and they will get you the spares that you require. This one has a slightly larger nozzle. I believe this one is a 0.5 millimeter nozzle, and it retails currently at £134. You see, there's no cup, obviously, so how does this work? Well, this is a suction feed airbrush, so we have a little can to go underneath. So on goes your airline, and there's your paint, and then when you operate it, obviously you draw the air and then you draw it back to get your paint to come up, and it comes up through. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, if you want to do a quick paint change and you've got a cup, then clearly you have to start, you empty the cup out, you rinse it off, clean it. Whereas I don't do that. I just press the end, I give it a blow back, blows the paint back into this container, put another little jar of airbrush cleaner on, spray that until it runs clear, and then revert back to the next colour. And if I'm doing that on the track or on buildings and in hillsides, it's fine. It's not necessarily the right thing to do on locomotives. You know, you might get bits of red paint coming out or whatever. But to do a fast changeover sort of can be quite useful. And I learnt this technique from a guy called Adrian, who used to work for Lord and Butler out on the outskirts of Cardiff in Penarth. This is a lovely, good quality airbrush, has given me no problems whatsoever, as long as, of course, I looked after it and clean it properly, which I must confess I tend to do. And then we get on to my final airbrush, my final airbrush, and I mentioned that that one was more of a Mercedes. Well, this is, welcome to the world of Aston Martins, because this is a Mr. Hobby, bear with me, Mr. Hobby PS771 airbrush. Now, I'm fortunate that my daughters and my sister occasionally buy me vouchers for a hobby shop called Antics. I don't think it's a nationwide chain. I think there's a shop in Plymouth, Cardiff, Bristol. There might be one in Stroud, and I'm sure if you know of others, please pop it down in the Show More tab. But this little beastie here is it's a real high-end job for minute detailing. This nozzle size is 0.18. So as you can imagine, it's more of a precision instrument. And I will touch on this end contraption here, because when you screw it in, it limits the amount of paint you can deliver. So if I press down when you get your air, and then you pull it back and you'll get your paint flow. But if you want to restrict your paint flow, then you just need to turn this knob. Now if I hold that down and turn it, you can see the lever come back and go forwards. So you can see how it works. And there's numbers printed on the side, so you can see what you're up to. There's also a protective cover for the crown. And then there's a little relief valve when you pull it and you can just blow paint through it. Finally, there's the pressure adjustment valve on the bottom. It's a top of the range airbrush. There's not a lot else I can say, except that I'm almost scared to use the damn thing. It's absolutely gorgeous, but there we go. So that's my airbrushes. I tend to use, for small jobs, I get out the G35. For more lengthy jobs with multiple colours, I'll get out the Eclipse, because it's a lovely job. And I'm scared to death. Whoops, I am scared to death to use the PS771, but I'm sure during our course of these videos this will be used in anger. So there's the airbrushes. So how do they work, and what about compressors? Well, here we have 3 compressors. This is my initial one that I bought as a package with the G35 airbrush, and this is known as an elephant compressor, obviously because it's grey and looks like an elephant. A bad thing about it, there is no pressure gauge on it, so it's always best guess. Sound wise, it's not too bad, but at the end of the day, I've set this up to what I believe to be round about 15 psi, and I've only judged that by the output from this one with a gauge. Sort of blow it onto my hand. Yeah, I know it's 15 psi coming off this gauge, and try to get the same effect on this one should I need 2 compressors, or to run one as a spare and leave him out of the way. So that's that one, the initial one. Not something you should embark on buying, because it has no pressure gauge. And then we get to these 2 here. There's the cheap end, my end, which is this one here, and then Roger's end, which is the Iwata one. Now price wise, the Iwata Silver Jet is a fascinating £169. Ooh, lovely. But there it is. It's a nice compressor with a really consistent airflow. It doesn't stutter. So there's probably an internal tank. So this charges us in a small internal tank, which then becomes a reservoir. So the feed out is much more consistent, whereas this one doesn't have the feed out. So this one here, coming off the piston, comes off in sort of very, very quick puffs, but it generates it so quickly that when it hits the airbrush, it then comes out as a consistent stream. So well, I'm not saying it's always best to have a tank, but this one here doesn't. But this one here retails at £64 rather than £169. If this one started to give me trouble, I imagine I would probably upgrade to something like this. But these are, you know, not necessarily this is a massive price. This is a, you know, it's a kind of workable price. I ought to turn them on so you can hear the sound of these 2. And it's a nice sort of compressor sound, and the leads are long enough. It shuts off when it's got enough pressure, by the way. So if I turn this back on, it will come back on. And it sits down on the carpet out of the way and does its stuff. Whereas this one here is clearly a noisier beast, but it's a more accurate thing. So yeah, we are where we are with these. But it just shows you that embarking on this endeavour can be quite expensive. But there is just one more thing of value, let's say, to buy, and that is some extractor system. If you're not a subscriber to this channel, could you hit the subscriber button, please? It keeps us content creators going, it really does. And if you are a subscriber, hit the button anyway to see if you're still subscribed, because I know YouTube, the strange algorithm, knocks people off now and again. Thank you. So here's the last piece of the puzzle then, the extractor unit. It all collapses down, folds away quite straightforward, and there's a little turntable. I don't know if you can see that on the inside. It has a cable that was supposed to rewind into the box section, but it now fails to do that. But it does sort of fold down reasonably easy. It's all a bit sort of cheap and cheerful really, but kind of, well, what do you expect for 99 quid? That goes there, that goes kind of into there, and that folds there. So it sort of folds away okay. The hose is being replaced. When I got the hose out this morning and pulled it out, it just sort of strung out and just fell apart really. But then it is kind of 8 years old, and with that hose probably needs to be pulled apart and compressed more regularly. Anyway, I think for a staggering £8 I've ordered a 4-inch hose from a tumble dryer from our friends at Amazon, which should be here tomorrow. But yeah, it's no big deal. It's nice and sort of cheap and cheerful, makes a bit of noise. And you can, you know, it obviously does extract. And as far as sort of health and safety and that sort of stuff's concerned, yeah, it's very, very important. But obviously should be used in conjunction with a face mask. And if you're using acrylics or enamels, depends on which face mask you really need. But we'll go into that tomorrow. Well, I must confess, not many of us find health and safety that interesting, let's say. So what have we got then? Well, I have a basic mask which I use for acrylic paints. Now, this is an opinion, it's not a fact. I believe that acrylic paints, you're filtering out the particles of the paint. There are no chemicals within it because it's a water-based paint. So all you're trying to do is stop the paint particles getting inside your lungs. And these things, this one here from 3M, does me just fine. After every painting session, I throw it away and then use a fresh one. And then hopefully there shall be a link in the Show More tab. However, just because I've left a link in the Show More tab doesn't mean it's safe to use. You need to do your research. Now, for enamel and cellulose paints, it's far more serious because the way these things are made up, there's a filter on the outside, which is a cloth filter, which is quite straightforward, and I always date it. This one is dated September 18, which shows you I haven't been doing much airbrushing because you'll see the paint absorb onto the outside. So that stops the paint, but what stops the fumes? And that's this thing here. This is a sort of a chemical absorbing pack, whether it's charcoal or whatever, I don't know. But again, this has a certain life, so you have to check the dates on these and then replace them accordingly. So there we have it. This is what I use. Again, I shall try and find some on the Amazon site and give you a heads up. So I'm sure you've all seen these things. These are a piece of cake to use really. It's just like a COVID mask. Oh, happy days, eh? Piece of cake, lovely. Whereas these ones are much more serious, and this goes over the back of your head, round your neck, and you need how embarrassing. So you need an airtight tight seal around this face area here. It's, you know, absolutely vital. But there we are. Both from these are all from 3M. This is what I use. God, made my eyes water. Please don't underestimate the importance of these things along with that extractor. The extractor will obviously absorb the paint if you're using it with acrylics, though I find it's not essential. With these things, it's absolutely vital. And when I'm spraying track with an enamel paint, so obviously I need this. Well, I'm spraying track now, I can't use the extractor. So what I do is I go in the last thing during the day, and using this, I spray the track with this on, and then I leave the room, and you know, for sort of 12 hours to allow the paint to settle and then obviously make sure that the room has adequate ventilation then to let all the nasty fumes blow through. Absolutely vital. It's quite a serious bit. Right, let's turn to painting. Now that takes us on to paint, and this is a little jar of Tamiya, or some people say Tamiya blue, and you might be able to hear it has a ball bearing inside. Clever little design that. And I went to a a model show in Yeovil the other day, and I bought a bag of ball bearings, and I think these are 4mm ball bearings, 100 of them for £6, because you can pop those into your Vallejo or whatever pots. For your bigger ones, I bought a bag of marbles. Easy. Now, getting back to the paint, you'll see everywhere it turns around and says you want to mix up your airbrush paint to the consistency of skimmed milk. Now, we seem to have a problem with understanding what that really means, and there's a great item you can purchase to help you in that endeavour, and it's called skimmed milk. Because if you don't understand the consistency of it, how are you supposed to get it to fall in free droplets, as they say? Because actually, skimmed milk never falls off the way that you see in these kind of, what would you say, more professional videos. Skimmed milk is very, very thin, and it doesn't, form into well sort of formed droplets at all. It's a kind of it's a lot thinner than people give it credit for. Right, so now we know the consistency of skimmed milk. Where's the top gone? We can hope to replicate its viscosity. Ooh, that's a big word. So we've got our Tamiya blue, and hopefully it's shaken up, and we've got a little jar in which to mix it. So I've no idea, I've never opened this jar before. This was from a friend of mine who sadly passed away. So we'll pour some of it in here, and we can see that that is too thick. Let's get rid of the jar before we spill that everywhere. So naturally, what we're going to thin it down with is Tamiya thinners. And I think the first thing we need to do is kind of go for a good squirt in here. Then, of course, give it a stir and see what this consistency is like. And hopefully you can see that it's more sticky than the skimmed milk. So we'll put another dash in here. And now it's starting to become more like skimmed milk. A little bit more. That is, of course, if skimmed milk was the right consistency that everyone kind of raves on about in the first place. And that to me is kind of about right. Okay, so what we're going to do with this, we'll clean this off and hoof it into the airbrush. And the airbrush I'm going to use is that little cheapy G35. And it's just worth mentioning about airbrushes, I've mentioned this before I'm sure, about double action airbrushes. Single actions are one to avoid, because if it's a single action you just press the button, you get air and paint exactly at the same time, whereas these double action ones, when you press it down you get just air, and then as you pull it back you get more and more paint. These are the ones to buy. If of course you want to dry your subject, you put some paint on it, you can always just press the button down and you'll just get air coming out, so you can actually help the paint itself to dry. So these are the ones to get, double action airbrushes. Right, so what I need to do is hoof some of this paint into my airbrush. Excuse me while I dress for the job accordingly. Pop some of this into the old cup, Beautiful. Pop the lid back on. Park the airbrush. Put the lid back on my little jar. And then come around and we'll have a little painting exercise. Now, as you can see, I've drawn a few lines on this piece of brown card to try to teach me to follow lines with an airbrush. So we'll kind of see how we get on. And a couple of vertical lines here as if to sort of draw bits of weathering down the sides of a locomotive or a van and that sort of thing. It's a bit of an awkward angle up here, so I expected to get a bit wavy. But the first thing I want to talk about is the dumbbell effect. Now, the dumbbell effect is when you want to draw a straight line across and you want to come back and you want to thicken it, and it's not to keep the airbrush on, because otherwise you get more paint at the ends. So hopefully I shall mask up and you can kind of understand me. The compressor is running at 15 psi. Right, wish me luck. Okay, now I mentioned about the dumbbell effects. If I turn the brush on and I come along and then I stop and I go back. So at the ends, when I go back, it loads up that end, if you see what I mean. So here and here, you get more of a splodge. Whereas if I want to try to come across this line here, sorry, my elbows are off the table here, it's quite hard. And I get to the end and I stop. And then I come back the other way. And stop. So you don't get the sort of loading of the ends. So the best thing to do now for yourselves is to draw yourself some kind of shapes and see how easy or difficult it is to follow. If you can keep your elbows on the table, it's much easier. Sadly, I've gone and drawn mine up a bit, but I'll see how I can sort of cope. Kind of getting there. Let's see how I get on with this circle. Now I've got my elbows on the table this time. A little bit heavy there, first pull. And the other thing to try to do is to keep the airbrush parallel with your surface, so not to tip it at a too big an angle. And you can see I made a splodge here because it came out faster than I thought. Right, let's just draw this sort of matrix here. And then try to make these lines a little thinner now. And then these. It's all over the place because my elbows are off the table. And I'll see if I can do this one here much thinner and much closer. So you can see you can get a very thin line, but it's just a case now of getting some hours on the airbrush and learning my trade. So there's a thicker, now we go thinner. Then finally, Charlie, there we are. Never as easy as you think. So now it's a case of cleaning up. What joy! And I have purchased in the past an Airbrush 3-in-1 cleaning pot. Lovely. And what you do is you kind of shove your airbrush in here and give it a squirt and things. But the first thing I'm going to do is take the top off me paint, and I've already poured back into here the stuff that I'd mixed up that I didn't use in the airbrush. I'll tip the remnants of here back in. Lovely, get rid of that. Put the paint back on there and get rid of that. I know it's thinned down, but then it's a great little visual aid to use blue. Oh, and I do apologise, the card wasn't brown, it was a grey card. Right, so now the airbrush is, the compressor's running, so we need to just burn off whatever we can from here. There should be a filter to sort all that muck out. Lovely. And then we need to run some thinners through the airbrush. I don't know if you can see this. Pop some thinners through there. And there's a filter inside, and then this is just the vapour coming off. Never sure how this thing works, to be perfectly honest. But there's a gauze to keep the paint on the inside. And this is obviously a water-based cleaner. Okay. Well, I think we're done with the basics. Now it's a case of stripping the airbrush down and giving it a good clean. But anyway, get all this cleaned off, and then into here. And that all comes clear, and it's a case of cleaning it out and giving it a good bougie down. And I understand people don't like doing this. Where's the fun in cleaning airbrushes? But at the end of the day, there's no way around it. It's got to be done. Then to strip it down is quite straightforward. It's just a case of undoing the hose, get rid of that, undo the moisture interceptor, get rid of that, and then we're left with the basic airbrush. We twist this bit off, get rid of that, and then it's a case of drawing out the needle. The needle is the most intricate part of the device, and if you break it or you bend it or whatever, it's no big deal. You just go and buy a new one. Don't try and straighten it or get it blended. So out comes the needle, and hopefully you can see that it's actually not that dirty at all. There's a little bit of residue on the end, but then again, it was an acrylic paint, which you might expect to be more muck on it, but we weren't exactly doing a great deal of work. And I'd like to think that the paint was at the right consistency, because it's when you get you get it wrong and you put too thick a paint mix in there that you get your troubles, really. So now it's a case of taking off the crown. I'm ready to clean that and the one behind it. Yeah. And there's the nozzle. And then we get in there and clean that. And then when you want to get in the orifices, as it were, I always use these, what do you call it? Johnson's cotton buds. Johnson's is obviously a kind of a better class of cotton bud, perhaps, but the reason I use it is that they don't tend to break up. So you get in there and get it clean, and yeah, just kind of does what it does on the tin, really. The other thing I have got is a set of brushes, and there are a set of brushes you can put into the airbrush. a lot of people decide to take out this trigger assembly, and I can't really see why. I'll take it out so you can see it, but I do not expect there to be any paint residue on the end of this assembly. So this will come out, the trigger will come out, and remember when you go to reassemble this, the hatched area on the trigger will go at the front. So there's this trigger assembly and all that palaver. That all comes out. Not when the camera's running, there it is. Give it a wiggle and out it comes, all straightforward. But as I said, there is no paint on it, so there is no real reason to take that out. A lot of people seem to do it for, because it's part of their cleaning process, but unless you've got a reason to strip it out, then you don't need to. And all it does really is make more hassle to try and get the wretched thing back together. But we're almost done. All we do is need a little bit more time cleaning around the bottom of this cup, and we should be good to go. And then what I'll do is reassemble it and then give it a blast through with some more cleaning agent and take it from there. But we seem to be done. It's as easy as that. Perfect. And then when it's all back together, it's just a case of dropping in a bit more cleaning fluid and just making sure that it runs clear, which it does. So there we are, one beautifully clean airbrush. Beautiful. Where's the lid? There it is. It's essential. You have to get it clean. Don't dream of putting it away with any paint on it, because the next time you use it, you'll be demoralised. You'll get it out of the cupboard and it won't work, and you know why it is. It's because you couldn't be bothered to sort it out last time. It's essential. You have to keep these meticulously clean. Nice little airbrush this one, really, for its money, isn't it? Under £100, or what was it? Oh, no, it wasn't. I found this morning. It was £112.38, and I mentioned the confusion between, was it Premiere and Iowata, and it clearly is by Iowata. So yes, it is an Iowata airbrush, though they imagine it was a cheaper range and they just put a Premiere on the side of it. But there we go, nice little airbrush, but as you can see, limited cup size, but it does what it says on the tin, really. There we go. Now, if watching this video has given you the urge to go and buy an airbrush and a compressor and all the toys, please don't do it. Stay tuned. Leave a comment in the comment section that this is a thing for you, or of course, if you're not interested, leave a comment, say, yeah, thanks to this, Charlie, I'll be back when you start doing more sort of scenics or whatever. But please let me know your feelings. If you want me to pursue, every month or so do an airbrush video or do a run of airbrush videos, to give me the feedback that I need, so I can create videos on your behalf. But as I said, if you're into this, please don't go and buy anything. Certainly don't go and buy the airbrushes that I own, because I need to get to grips with them. I don't want you to go and buy the wrong airbrush. So I can sort of bring on my skills and take it from there. If you're a member of a club and you can borrow an airbrush from somebody then and all the kit, then that's absolutely brilliant. You can sort of find your own way. Iowata aren't the only decent make out there. There are lots of good companies, and I know I was quite aggressive towards the £20 or £30 airbrushes, but all I can do is turn around and tell you what the folks that I know have thought of those airbrushes. It really is a case of you get what you pay for. I could just as easily, put paint in them and give them a go, but then in 6 months' time the thing just breaks up and the seals go. Then it's not going to be, useful for you as a consumer, let's say. That's kind of what I am. But there are some really good other manufacturers of airbrushes out there, but make sure you get good guarantees and good pet spares support. That's what really matters. Not a lot else to say about this really. You know, stay tuned and let me know what you want next. You know, the next video on the airbrushes could either be on acrylics or on enamels, or a sort of a crossover, and then we'll certainly start spraying paint on wagons on the next video. So that wraps this one up. I'd like to thank the patrons for making it all possible, for the subscribers who keep me going, and if you're not one, there's the button, you know it's free, and a video here and here. I'll see you in 2 weeks time. Thanks, I'll take care. Bye bye.